I got an email from a student who is taking my Udemy course on building phaser games, and he asked if I'd help to put together a puzzle game that he wanted to create. And I agreed because after he sent me the link, I looked at it and thought this would be a good one for sharing on YouTube and how to put the game together. All you do for playing the game is to simply remember what the last card was. There I've got an orange square, and I hit the yes button, the green check if it's the same, and the red button if it's not. And you always have to remember what the last card was. And that's it. That's the basic gameplay, and it's very easy to put together, and I'll show you how to do it now. There are a few files and tools that I will need to make this game. One is the XAMPP local server, because we can't run phaser code on just the local system without a server in place. Now, if you want to put it on web space, that's fine. If you would like to use the XAMPP server and you don't have it installed yet and would like some help getting it installed, please check out my YouTube channel where I will show you how to do that. I'll be using the Sublime text editor. It is a free download if you want to grab that as well. It does occasionally nag you to buy it. There doesn't seem to be an expiration date on it, but it would certainly be worth the investment anyway. And I've got two images here that we're going to use to make this game: the right and wrong buttons and the shape cards. And you can grab the full source for the game at williamclarkson.net. To be building it, I will be using the Mega template, which includes a preloader and start and in-game screens and just some things to help you along. I use it to make all my games now for Happy Place Games because it just speeds up development so much. And after you download that, I have myself made a YouTube folder inside my htdocs, so anywhere in htdocs will work. And I'm going to copy the Mega template there, and I am going to call it ShapeMem. And let me show you what the template looks like without any edits. This is the start screen. This is for a landscape game, and I'll show you how to change it to a portrait in a moment. There's background music and some sound buttons put in there. We won't need those for this game, but they're good to have in there. And some buttons and just some sample code to show you how to do buttons and sound. And the game over screen. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the two images, the right and wrong buttons, and the shape card, and put them into Images, Main. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the folder path to that folder of ShapeMem. And then I'm going to open it in my file editor. Now you may have noticed you have to look quick because there's not many files here to load, but there is a loading progress bar. And we can have our files be taken into consideration for that loading bar by placing them in the load state. That's under the JS, JavaScript folder. States, state load. And there's a little comment that I left here, preload everything here. And this is where the background music got loaded and also the elephant sound that you heard. Now we don't need the elephant sound or the background music, so I'll just take those out for now. We will need our buttons that are now in the images folder, in the main, the right and wrong buttons, and the shape cards. So we load that as an image. And if you need some more basic help on loading images, then please see my YouTube channel where I go over a lot of this. And actually we need to do it as a sprite sheet, because as you see, the right and wrong button is a 2-frame sprite sheet, and the shape card is 16. So we're going to load that, and we're going to call the first one, the card sprite sheet, well, cards. And that's it. Images, main, shape cards, .png. And each of those frames, each of those cards, I made 300 and, well, the card is actually 300 pixels wide by 300 pixels wide. But because you need to put a little space between the cards, we put it at 310, 310, just to give it a little buffer. And there are 16 cards. Then we need to load the buttons. And we're going to call it game buttons. It's at images, main, and right-wrong.png. And let's see, that each one is 320 by 300 with a little buffer space put in between the two. Because if you don't put a little space in the image, then it will bleed through. So you'd be seeing some of that red leak onto the green if I had them just right next to each other. And that's why you've got to put a little bit of transparency between them. Now, if you go into the JS folder, down here is the main.js, main JavaScript file. And the way I've set the template up, if you want to change it from portrait to landscape, or in this case, landscape to portrait, you just change this Boolean value here. Use landscape, and you set that to false. There. It's all connected, and it's loading our images. Of course, we can't see that yet. Let's go over to our state main. That's where the main game plays. And here's the sample code in here for the music buttons and the elephant sounds and such. And we're just going to go ahead and comment all that out. We may need to use it later, so I don't want to delete the code. We do not need the elephant sound, though, so I will take that out. And I think we can go ahead and we'll just go ahead and delete all this code. Let's start by simply making a card. And I'll put it in the scope of this, meaning this, the state main. So anywhere in this code, we can access the card by saying this card. This card equals game, add, sprite. And I can put it in the center of the screen by saying game world center X, X with a capital X. and game world center Y, and cards is the identifier that we need, that we set back in the loading state. And if you need help understanding about how to add the sprites, again, check out my YouTube channel. I have videos on that there. So now we should have a card right in the middle of the screen. Now, it's not quite in the middle of the screen, but if you can see here, the corner of it is in the middle of the screen. Now, that's because the registration of the sprite, the anchor point, is up here at the top, and we need to set it here in the middle. So whenever we set a coordinate, it applies to the middle of the object rather than the top. And it's very easy to do. This card, anchor, set 0.5, 0.5, which is half of the card. And again, I have more videos on this on my YouTube channel. So now if I refresh it, there, in the middle of the screen. Now let's change that red square, which is the first one in the line, and that's why it's going to the red square. If we want to change it, we can simply set the frame number. This card frame equals 6. If I refresh, now it's a star. Now we can randomly set that by making a function pick rand card. And we can pick a random number between 0 and 15 because the frames start counting at 0. And I'll just make a variable here called index, and we'll set it to a random number, and I'll use the built-in phaser random number generator. And this will pick a number between 0 and 15, including 0 and 15. And this card frame equals index. I'll take out this line of code here. We don't need that now. And we'll call the function this pick rand card. I'll run it again. And let's see, I have an error here. I misspelled something. Game integer in range. I also have code snippets on williamclarkson.net if you want to use those to copy and don't misspell things like I do. It's a red square. Now that's the first frame, so there we go. A red pentagon, and run it again. A blue circle. So great. Now we've got our shape picking. Our cards are being picked randomly and displaying randomly for the shapes. Now we have to give the player of our game a way to know that the card has changed. If we just kept it in the middle and we flipped it to the same card, they wouldn't know it was changed and wouldn't know whether or not to push the right button or the wrong button. And as you saw the example of the game, what I like to do is to slide it in and out. And I'll make a function here called, let's see, just slide card in. Function, brackets, and don't forget to put that comma after the function. That gets me sometimes. And I'm going to use the phaser snippets, and you can find these at williamclarkson.net under Toolbox Phaser Snippets. They save me a lot of time, and then you can modify that to your need. Game, add tween, and then you give it the name of the sprite, in this case this card, and we want to change the X position, and we're going to send it to game world center X, where the card is now. And 300 milliseconds should do it. We'll leave this on none. There's more documentation about that out there. This is for different types of tweening, different kinds of easing like bounce or elastic, things like that. But I like a straight, simple, no frills tween. And the true indicates whether or not to use the tween right away. In other words, you could put it on the variable var tween, and if you set that to false, then you could later say tween start if you wanted to define the tweens ahead of time. But we're going to have it go right away. Now, as I said, the card is already at the center X. So what we can do here is simply say this card X equals game width plus the card width. That'll get it well off the screen. Otherwise, because of the anchor that we set earlier, it would be partially on the screen when it started. And pick the random card. And when we pick the random card, we can call this slide card in. Let's have a look at that. And there's an error, card is not defined. And I didn't call it this card, so it's important to reference it with the scope. In other words, this, unless it's a local variable. There we go. Now, I tried it a couple of times and nothing happened, and what I had to do is push Control F5. I'm using Chrome and Windows, and sometimes things get cached in the JavaScript because it wants it to run faster. So if you ever have a problem where it's not updating and you know you've changed the code, Control F5 should clear it. There we go, a nice slide in. Now what I would like to do here is to be able to slide the first card in, wait for a few seconds to give them a chance to remember it, and then slide it out. So of course we'll need a slide card out function. And I'm just going to copy this entire function and change the in to out. And we just simply change the target of where it's going instead of the center. We'll give it the negative this card width. And then we need a function to call to delay the slide out. Delay slide out function. And there is a snippet called, under miscellaneous, called phaser timer. And if you copy that and paste that in delay slide out, and then we need to give it the function, and that is slide card out. This slide card out. And the scope, as always, is this. And this is set up to do a one-time 1 second delay. If you want to ever use this timer code to call things over and over, you would simply change the add to loop. But this is a one-shot timer. and I want to have it for 4 seconds, so I just add an asterisk 4, timer second times 4 here. And then after we call the pick ran card, we'll call delay slide out. See how that looks now. I'll refresh. Start. It slides in. It waits for 4 seconds and then slides out. The 4 seconds may have been a little long. We can always change it. I'll just change it to 3. And the next thing we want to do is know when the card is done sliding out so we can slide in the new card, which is of course just simply the same card. We're using the same piece over and over and changing the frame, but it will look like a new card. And we can do that by adding a listener to our tween. And if you go back to the tween snippets, tween complete. So slide card out, tween on complete add, and we'll make a new function called slide done. It will be this slide done. And slide done function. And then we can pick the new card. Slides out and slides in. Now it slid in from the right, or from the left rather than the right, because that's where the card was. If we want it to slide in from the right, as we had done before, we'll have to reset the position every time the pick ran card is called. And since we're doing that right after this line, I'm going to cut it from line 13, and we will place it right here. So every time we're picking a new card, it will come from the right. Let's try it again. Wait 3 seconds, slide out, and slide the new one in. So good. Now we need the buttons for the user to press. Now, if you remember earlier, we preloaded the game buttons in our load state load. And game buttons then is what we need to reference when making the buttons in state main here. We need a yes button and a no button. Button yes if it matches and button no if it doesn't. So this button yes equals game add sprite. And I'm going to set it just at 0, 0, the top left corner for a moment, and I'll show you why. And we'll make the no button, but instead of putting it at 0, 0, I'll keep the y at 0, and I'll put it button yes width plus 20. That'll make it start after button yes, this button yes. And we'll go ahead and still keep the y at 0 and put game buttons in there. And button no needs to be at frame 1 instead of 0. Now this, I promise you, is going to look horrible. There, huge. So what can we do about that? Now I could simply set the height and the width, but the problem is that we're going to be displaying this on the computer and on phones and iPads and what have you. And when we start out, we don't know the size that we're going to have. So there are two things I'm going to do. The first thing is I'm going to make a group called button group. And a group is just a way of keeping elements together and treating it as one object. So this button group equals game add group. And that's it. And after we create the buttons, this button group add, this button yes, this button no. And so now those are in a group. So if I change the X and Y of the button group, say is Y equals this card Y plus this card height. And since the card has a anchor of 0.5, 0.5, in other words, centered, we'll say that card height divided by 2. Now that will put it down below the card. What it won't do yet is resize them, and we will get to that. So there, now they're down below. I only had to move the group to do that. Now we're going to have to resize several things, including the card. So I'll just go ahead and make a function called resize object, and it will take a parameter of an object. So I can pass the card or the button group, and we're going to do it a percentage of the game width. So the second parameter is per. And I could simply set the buttons to the percentage of the game width, but I only want it to do it if it's larger than that percentage. So while object scale X is greater than game width times per. So in other words, if the scale of the object, I've messed that up. Let me change that to while the game object width is greater than the game width times the percentage. Then we take the object scale X and we subtract 0.01. So it's very precise. As soon as it gets within those parameters, it will stop. And then we say object scale Y equals object scale X. And that way it'll keep it proportional. So now if I say this resize object, this button group, and we'll have it at, let's see, 60%. So that would be 0.6. Let's see what that does. And we have an error there. Resize object equals colon function. I've been writing code in a different style all week, so excuse me. There. Now they are resized proportionally in relation to the screen. Now we need to do is center them. We can say this button group X equals this button group width. 1 second. Game world center X, excuse me. The center of the screen minus this button group width and divided by 2. But we may need to play around with the anchors there too. Nope, that got it. Perfectly centered. Let's go ahead and resize the card to 70%. And we need to do that and then position the card after that as well, possibly resize object. But it's center anchored, so it may be okay. This card in 0.7. It didn't look like it changed. No errors. Let me do it at 50% and see what happens. Yeah, it did work. We might put it back up to 70%. And the reason for doing this is I'm going to toggle the device toolbar on the Chrome. And let me refresh it to show you what it would look like now on iPhone 6. There, it all still fits proportionally on the screen. iPad. And sometimes we need to adjust more for the iPad, but it does all fit. And this Acer phone, which is a custom one that I put in because it was the dimensions of a phone I had in Thailand, but it was a very small screen. As you can see, it still all fits, and it's proportional to the screen size. So now we're ready to put in a little game logic. Now there are a couple of things we need to keep track of to be able to determine if the player has clicked the correct button or not. And we also need to hook up the buttons. So first, let's keep track of the current card. We'll replace this var index with this current card. So this current card will hold whatever value is showing on the screen at the time. And I'll replace the word index down here with this current card. And we will make another variable called write card. So after it picks the first card and the delay slides out, and it slides out, then this write card will equal this current card. Now let's hook up the buttons. And there are some button snippets on williamclarkson.net. And the first thing we need to do is, because we're using these sprites, we need to be able to enable the sprites for input to tell Phaser to listen to events on the sprites. Otherwise, it won't. So button yes dot input enabled equals true. And we'll do the same for button no. Now we have these functions in here from earlier that were in the template, say yes and say no. So we'll just use those since they're still in there. And here is the snippet for the sprite click. And we'll put it right under where the buttons are enabled. And we need 2 of them. And we'll just replace that char 1 with button yes and button no. And the click handler for button yes will be this say yes and this say no. And this is the scope. Let's go ahead and just put some test data down here, some output. Console log say yes, just to make sure that the buttons are actually hooked up and working. I like to test as I go, and I maybe over test a bit, but it's better to do just 3 steps, 4 steps, and then test rather than wondering where everything went wrong. And sometimes I test every step that I go. It just depends. So let's see. Now we have, if you don't already have it open, I've got the debug open. I push F12 to get that open on Chrome. It is also here under More Tools, Developer Tools. And this is the output area here. Also, if there's a mistake in the code, like right now, it will say that as well. And you can click and see where it is. So it is saying missing parentheses. So the parentheses is missing here. And then I know exactly where to find it. So it's good to leave that open while you're making the game, while you're testing it. Now I push the green button and I get the say yes message, and I push the red button and I get the say no. So I know the buttons are hooked up. So let's go ahead and put some logic in here. If they say yes, and this card, current card, is equal to this right card, then they've chosen correctly. If they haven't chosen correctly, then we do game, state, start, state, over, and we'll go to game over. Now I can copy this directly into say no, and then the only thing I need to change is if this current card doesn't equal. So if they say no and they don't equal, if they're not the same, then the player got it right. And then we up the score. So I'll make a function right here called upScore. And say score plus plus. And score is already defined over here as a global in the template. And then in state main, we always set it to 0 in case they hit play again or come in for the first time, then the score is reset. So score plus plus, and we'll display that on a text field later. And this pick random card. So it will pick a new card. But what we need to do is, if they've picked correctly, then the current card becomes the right card. This right card equals this current card. And then we call that upScore function here. This upScore, and down here as well. Let's test it out and see if we have any mistakes in the code. No, good. Push start. And there's our first one. It goes out, and it's not a red star, it's an orange square, so I push no. And it's still not the same, not the same, not the same. Now it's the same, so I push yes, and the score is updated. So good. That is all basically working. Now what we want to do, I think, is, because you saw I hardly ever got a match, so I could just keep hitting no, 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 and get a very high score just by doing that. So on the pick random card, we'll give it a chance. Let's see, we'll call it per for percent. I'll just copy this, and we'll give it a chance between 0 and 99, or 1 and 100, just to make it easy. And if the percent is less than 30, so there's a 30% chance, then this current card equals this right card. Else, this current card equals the random. So there is now a 30% chance that you'll have the same card in a row. Test that out. Check for errors over here in our console. No, good. Okay, start. And the same. And not the same. And they're sliding in, but they're not sliding out. So we need to fix that as well. So it's picking the right one here. So we just pick the random card. So what we do is, we can just call slide card out, because slide card out already has, when it is done with that tween, it will pick the card. So let's see if that fixes it. Okay, wait for the first one to go out. Not the same. Great, that's much better. Oh. So great. Now, one of the things you may have noticed is that when we play the game, we've still got these buttons here, even though it's still picking the first one. So let's turn those off by just saying this button group visible equals false. And then after the delay slide out, which is right down here, this slide card out, we can simply put on the slide done, we can turn the visibility back on. Now, it will call that code every time, but it will already be visible, so it won't hurt anything and it won't slow anything down. So there it is. It slides out, and then we have our buttons. So next, let's put in some text to display the score. Now, adding text to Phaser is relatively straightforward. Just make a variable, in this case score text, and say game add text. And we give it a position, game world center X. And I'm just going to put it at 0 for the Y right now, and we'll move it down later based on the height of the text. And since the score always starts at 0, we pass 0 in as a string. In this score text, we want to set the anchor so it is centered. So we'll go in the center of the screen correctly. 5. In score text, we need to next set the font size because we want fairly a big font so it's easy to read. And that is font size. And if you need reference to this, it is under Phaser text snippets on williamclarkson.net. Font size equals, say, 128. We want it to be really big. And if I run it right now, the text would be there, but we wouldn't be able to see it because the default color is black, and also the default color for the canvas is black. So we need to change it to white, and that is under the property fill. And just put 6 F's in there after the hashtag. And then if you're using Sublime, it'll underline what that color is. Let's refresh, see if we get any mistakes in console. And there it is up at top. But as I said, we're going to set it dynamically, and it's off the screen right now because it's center aligned. But now that we've made it, it has a height. We don't know the height of it when we're setting it up here. We don't know the height yet, but after we have created it, then we can say this score text Y equals this score text height. And I think because that is all centered, it'll give it a bit of a buffer at the top as well. There we go. Maybe not quite so high. We're close to the card. So we'll say score height divided by 2. And it'll probably put it right up at the top, but that's okay. All right, that looks good. Now we need to be able to display the score in there. And in our up score function, we simply say this score text equals score. And for some reason it is not advancing. This score text dot text, I should say. This dot text is property. Nope, I got it wrong the first one. It's not the same, so there it goes. It's advancing the score. There, great. Now the last little bit I'm going to do is simply to put a timer on here. And the first thing I'll need is a text field to display that. So I can just copy all of this, make some room here, and change score text to time text. There. And then we need to declare a variable called seconds, or sex. So this sex equals 0. And we'll make a little function here called tick, and where we will subtract the seconds. And if the seconds are equal to 0, then game state start state over. And we can copy this one little line of code here and just delay slide out. And we'll put it right at the end of our create function. We'll change it to 1 second. This tick. And instead of the word game time events add, we say loop. Here we can also say this time text dot text equals this seconds. So let's give that a try. Except we need to change the size. I forgot we're putting it exactly the same place. So we'll change the font size to just 32, and we're going to set that right in the corner of the screen. And actually, the seconds need to be up to 60 seconds instead of 0. And we can easily change that as well. So let's see what happens. And it's not displaying the whole thing. Let's move that over some. Let's put it at 50. Great. That looks like that's working. Now, just to test it out, let's set the seconds to just 5 so we can see if the game over is working or not. There. And it is. Now that's the basics of the memory game. Now, of course, there are a lot of other things that can be done, such as putting in sound effects and labels for the score and such like that. But you have enough information now from this video to do it on your own. And if you get into any difficulty with the code, you've got a question, email me, contact me through the website, williamclarkson.net. There's a contact form, and I will email you back, and then you will have my email, and we can correspond, and I'm happy to help you with any gaming problems that come up. I thank you for watching this long video, and let me know any way that I can help.